Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. My guest today is David Young. David Young is a twice Grammy-nominated musician who plays 2 Renaissance flutes at one time in harmony, as you just heard. He has recorded 57 albums and sold over 1 million copies. He is a healer, channel, artist, and writer of 3 books. And it is said that more people have had out-of-body experiences while listening to his music than other musicians alive today. And I wanted to go to Johns Hopkins Medical Centers, actually have entire floors that play his music 24/7 because of the healing aspect. Approximately 300,000 people a day are being treated while listening to your music. Mm-hmm. Wow. Welcome.
Thanks for having me here.
I'm so happy you're here. And it's interesting because for me, as soon as I hear the first notes, it's like settling in. But you started out as a rock musician.
I did. I played in heavy metal bands in the 80s, had very long hair, and now I've grown up, and this is what I'm doing now.
So how did that transition come about?
I was 30. I started playing the flute at Venice Beach because I had run out of money. I made a tape called Celestial Winds. I sold 10,000 copies of that tape over the following 2 years. Then I started to make CDs, and I've sold 1 million CDs now, and my flute music just took over my life.
Wow.
It was nothing that I ever could have seen coming, and I didn't plan it. Whoever planned it did a really good job, though.
Wow. That's amazing. So now you've got all of these wonderful CDs, and I'm going to keep inviting people to check out your website. And it's going to be on the screen because it tells about events where you play and also where they could get these CDs. So tell me about the events you do. It's something portal between heaven and earth, and talk about that.
Well, I've done 360 events in the last 3 years all over the United States. And I start off with like a 30-minute introduction where I explain to people what's possible, because most of the time people don't really know what's possible spiritually, So for example, Martin Luther King showed up to a woman on a Friday night, and after the meditation was over, she explained that Martin Luther King came to her during the meditation while I was playing the flutes, and he told her that he had work for her to do in 2 to 3 days. Now, there were 40 people in the room who heard this on a Friday night.
Right.
Well, 2.5 days later, she posted on my Facebook page that her boss called her into his office on Monday morning and put her in charge of the Martin Luther King Fund at their company. And she didn't know there was a Martin Luther King Fund at their company. And from Friday night to Monday morning is 2.5 days. He said between 2 and 3 days, So he obviously knew what he was talking about.
Wow. So I want to talk about that some more. But I also want to talk about the healing aspect of music. So people have visitations during this. So either from Buddha, loved ones,
or the ascended masters or the archangels. And actually, the heavenly dimension is very different from this physical dimension, because everything in this physical dimension is kind of like in competition. And there's all this separation, like you either go to this church or that synagogue or that temple. Nobody would go to 2.
Right.
But you see, in the heavenly dimension, Buddha and Jesus and Moses and Krishna and Mother Mary and all of the ascended masters, they all work together. They're all part of the same team. So there is no separation. So the way we look at spirituality, the way we were taught to look at spirituality in the physical world, that's completely not the way it is in the heavenly dimension.
So for people who don't know what this means, what does ascended master mean?
Well, if you could put Jesus or Buddha or Krishna or Moses in that category of ascended masters, and just for whatever it's worth, they really don't like being called masters.
Right.
Because that, looks like they're in charge of you. We all have free will. Between the ascended masters, the archangels, and our loved ones are always offering guidance to us. And we have the choice to listen to that guidance and benefit from it, or not listen to that guidance. So one of my books is called Divine Inner Guidance. And it's about the incredible things that happen when you listen to your intuition, as well as the incredible things that happen if you don't listen to your intuition. It's much more enjoyable if you listen to it.
Yes, so I want to ask you about that because, again, we read about spirituality and we have our own experiences, whatever, and are told to, pay attention to intuition. And so how should people pay attention? What are they listening for? What's the access?
It's a strong feeling. People get messages in different ways. Sometimes we hear a voice, like an inner voice, that's telling us to do something. Sometimes we get a strong gut feeling. And it all depends on the individual. But the whole point is that when you get a strong feeling about something, listening to it makes your life better. It also makes your life much more magical. If your life is a little boring out there in TV land, just start listening to your intuition and watch the magical stuff that happens. Because I've literally been partly responsible for 6,000 miracles in the last 3 years. Because there have been 6,000 people who came to my events who had an experience where, their grandmother or their son or their dad appeared to them and showed them all around heaven. And a lot of things can be healed through that,
Wow. And I guess part of the there are many doorways that can help you. So meditation is one of them. Your music is another. So I think part of it also is people being willing to slow down for a minute and listen to that.
Well, meditation is so popular now. I mean, in Southern California and parts of Florida, there are more yoga studios than there are coffee shops. And there's over 50 million Americans meditating or doing yoga once or twice a week. So this isn't, I remember 30 years ago when I was getting into spirituality, there weren't that many people I could talk to about it, But now, oh my gosh, everybody knows 5 people that go to yoga, and meditation is part of yoga.
That's true, yeah. So tell me about your own personal experiences. So you provide this kind of music that opens doorways and, creates miracles in some ways. What about your own experience?
Well, I've been meditating.
You have no one playing music for you.
No, I'm working my way up to that, I'd like to have, no, I'm just kidding. Imagine that, having a flute player, you could just, hey, can you play a song for me so I can meditate anytime you want? That would be nice. Well, I meditate every day, and one of the things I've learned from meditating for 35 years is that the first 5 minutes, that's like the warm-up. That's the appetizer. That doesn't really count. Because your mind is so used to moving and thinking and planning everything, that when you need to give yourself at least 15 minutes of meditation before you at least start getting into anything good. And I found that if you meditate for longer than 25 minutes, every 10 minutes you go deeper into your meditation, you're having more space between your thoughts. Because your mind is relaxing, and in that space is where we can receive messages, get visions, and, all these wonderful things that really make our lives incredibly magical and that give us that deep inner peace. Like any yogi in India, if you told him you meditate for 10 minutes a day, he would laugh, because 10 minutes is just the warm-up. I have meditated for an hour. My longest meditation was for 3 hours, and it was really the most profound experience I ever had in my life in meditation, because it takes time for your mind to get out of the way.
So I'm going to throw in something for our audience,
Okay.
because one of the things I do as a coach, I do talks on stress and meditation and whatever, and I try and demystify meditation for people and say, you have to start somewhere. 5 minutes is good enough as a start, because otherwise they're terrified. Like 15 minutes, half an hour, I can't do it. And then they keep saying, I didn't succeed. And I said, if you did it, you succeeded, even if it's for 5 minutes. So that's kind of my little tagline there.
Well, I'm glad you told me that before the show so I could say the whole thing.
But the reality is that, yes, the deeper the experience, it's just like anything else when you're building muscles or, becoming a competitive athlete. In the beginning, it's short periods, and then it becomes easier and easier. Yes. So, so if somebody says, I want to talk about the healing aspect. So Can you explain the mechanics of the healing, if there is such a thing?
Well, one of the things that I have learned about these instruments that I play is that when you play two of these instruments at one time, the two notes create a third note. It's called a triharmonic tone. So I'll show you what I mean, because I'll play one at a time. You can hear that's one note, right? And that's one note. But watch what happens when I play them together. There's almost like this zzz kind of thing. Could you hear that third note a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could you hear it there?
Well, I think I hear it. It sounds different to me. Yeah.
Well, the two notes create a third note, and that third note is a frequency.
Okay.
And so in heaven, everything is frequency and vibration. You know, they don't have cells and atoms like we have. Everything is made of light, and everything moves through frequency and vibration. Mm-hmm. And so when people have near-death experiences, one of the things that they talk about is the inner light that they see and the inner sound that they hear. And the closest thing, from what I'm told and what I've experienced, the closest thing you can experience to that inner sound in the heavenly dimension is that frequency I create by playing the two flutes at one time. You know, because that frequency, that's a vibration, and that your soul hears that, and it's like, oh, I know that sound. I've heard that sound in between every one of my physical lifetimes.
Wow.
When I've spent time in the heavenly dimension. And I play music at the national conventions for people who've had near-death experiences. And over 20 million people in America have had documented near-death experiences that were documented by their nurse or doctor in a hospital. And so if you want to know anything about heaven, talk to one of your friends or your family who's
I actually have interviewed some people who have had near-death experiences, yes. And that whole thing about sound. And you know, sometimes people, and again, everybody is some layer of open or haven't even heard or thought of these things. But the idea is, if you just, you know, why do we all love the sound of the ocean? It makes us feel something. It's sound, it's vibration. And, you know, and then again, there's music that if you play when your kids are little, that is like agitating, you'll notice them
like giving them coffee.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all quite obvious if we make the connection. So then there are certain vibrations that will elevate us and others that will not. But whatever gave you the idea to play two flutes?
I was bored.
And you just happened to have an extra flute.
Well, I was playing at Venice Beach in 1990, and the harpist I was playing with only knew like 6 chords and 7 songs. So we played those same 7 songs over and over, like 30 or 40 times a day. And for a musician, that's called torture.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so during the afternoon, after we'd played those songs at least 20 times, and I was bored out of my mind, she used to get all the attention because she was a beautiful woman with, you know, white flowing dresses and a Celtic harp and long flowing hair. And I was like the invisible man. People would walk by, oh, look at that beautiful woman, that beautiful harp. I was getting nothing, you know, and I was the middle child in my family, you know. So it really...
history replicating itself.
I didn't like that at all. And so every once in a while in the afternoon, after I'd played those songs 20 times or so, out of sheer boredom, I would pick up a second flute and think, man, I wonder if I could play 2 of these at one time just to break up the boredom. And every time I did that, whoever was walking by would say, hey, look, that guy's playing 2 flutes at one time. And then she was invisible. It was the only reason why I did it. But I made a whole career out of it because besides being a memorable visual, you know, it was a sound that was really touched people's hearts and their souls, you know.
Wow. So let's talk about channeling, because there are people who go, oh, another
well,
one
there's
of
2
those.
kinds of channeling.
Okay, so let's talk about it.
There's channeling, and then there's evidential channeling. Okay. Obviously, evidential channeling has evidence. So I'll give you an example. Jesus, you know who he is, right? His real name is Yeshua. You know, he was pretty popular, right? He had a good band, you know. I had a couple of big hits, you know. Well, he gave me a message.
I saw it on Broadway.
Yeah. He gave me a message through a channeler, and he said, tell David through this channel that there's big news coming out of the Vatican in Rome. And I grew up Jewish, and I couldn't understand why you would give me a message like that, because I never really cared what came out of the Vatican in Rome. And the following week, the new Pope issued a statement that went against the Bible and created a whole big stir in the Vatican, because the new Pope said there is no hell out there. The only hell there is down here on earth. And a week before, Jesus had told me through that channel there was big news coming out of the Vatican in Rome. That's called evidential channeling.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get to a point where you have evidence in the spiritual things you're talking about that you're receiving from spirit, whether you can get a message from your grandmother or you can get a message from, Mother Mary or Mother Teresa, when you get a message that completely adds up, the way that message adds up, that's called evidential channeling. And that's what I'm more interested in, because I just think it's more fun that you can actually prove this stuff to people.
And have you had other experiences like that?
Never. No, I'm joking. I have had. I've had some. I've got.
Let's end the show right now.
Yeah. I experience these things every day. Sometimes 3 times a day.
Can anybody do that?
I think anybody can do it. You just have to learn to trust. You have to learn to trust when you get a feeling about something, or when you get a message, because it's, the problem that we have in this physical world is that we grow up being taught that logic is so important. And we're brought up with this thing called intelligence, but intelligence really in our school system is just about memorization. It's really not being smart. There's a difference between being smart and creative and being able to memorize a bunch of numbers or a bunch of facts. If memorization is that important, then every person with autism should be looked at like a genius, because they can remember numbers and facts and all that stuff like nobody can do it. So by learning to trust your gut feelings about things, and because there's sometimes, like earlier in my life, I was getting a message to do something or not to do something, and I didn't listen because, it didn't come across in a fax or an email. You know what I mean? I couldn't tell if it was my own mind or if it was a message.
Do you have any specific where you didn't listen and you got into trouble?
I do, actually. I was driving through Arizona, and I was looking at the map, and it looked like I was going to be able to take a shortcut, and inside I heard this voice that don't do it, right? Well, I'm looking at the map. It really looks like this is going to save me a bunch of time, don't do it, right? So I get off at a gas station 10 minutes later, and there's this little old lady there. I have a map there. And I said, I'm looking at the map. It looks like I can save a lot of time if I cut across down this road over here. She said, don't do it. It was like the same voice I heard in my head, right? So anyway, 15 minutes later, I'm getting off at this exit, and I'm like, I'm going to do it. What's the worst that can happen? Now, that's always a good sign. If you ever say what's the worst that can happen, that's,
right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's not a good sign. You know what I mean?
You should not be doing it.
Hello. Right. So I get off there, and my water bottle, because I got off quickly, comes flying across, hits me in the head. I didn't get that message either. And I ended up going higher and higher, 7,000 feet up into these mountains in Arizona. It starts snowing like you can't even believe. It takes me 2 hours to drive through this on this winding road. Oh, it was just horrible, and I had white knuckles, and I'm really talking to God a lot right then.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, man, I will listen. I will. Just help me live through this thing. I promise. And so I finally get through the mountain range, and I drive 15 more minutes to a gas station, and I'm so grateful I'm alive.
And they say, jerk.
And
why'd you do it?
Hold on. So I asked this woman at the gas station, I said, I'm trying to get to Flagstaff. Is this the way to go to Flagstaff? And she said, well, normally, yes, but there was a milk truck that went off the road last night, and it's kind of like they stopped traffic completely, so you can't go there anymore. I'm like, well, what are you saying to me? She says, oh, you have to turn around and go back. I said, ma'am, I wasn't laughing. I said, there's no way I'm turning around and going back where I came. And she says, well, you can take this road over here if you want. Okay, so I took that road. When I finally got to the highway, I was at exit 88. I got off the highway 3 hours earlier at exit 87. Okay? So I'm driving down the highway, and now I'm really listening. I'm really having a great conversation with the Almighty or God or whatever you want to call it, my angels. And so there was an exit that was coming up, and inwardly I said, should I get off at this exit? No. Next exit was 5 minutes later. Should I get off at this exit? Nope. Next exit was 5 minutes later. I said, should I get off at this exit? Yes, this is the exit for you. When I got off the exit, there was a place to eat called the Jackass Cafe.
I love it. That's so great. But you know why I asked you to tell that is because people need to hear real examples. Like,
Sure.
what was that sense of? And I do that all the time. I'll close my eyes in a store and say, okay, is this good for me?
Sure.
If I'm buying a certain brand of vitamins or whatever. And I just tune in. And, I hope there aren't cameras watching me wondering what I'm doing. But it's trusting some inner instinct and that, oh my God, that's so
You get
great.
better at it after a while, because when you have enough good results or horrible results,
Yes. I
after
love that horrible result
right.
story.
After a while you start to, and you know what? It's easy.
Mm-hmm.
We're not used to things being easy.
Mm.
And when we get a message, it's like, really? It's that
That's
easy? I just have to listen to that?
Right.
Really? Can anything be that easy?
Right. Yes. That's great. And so just briefly, what's the other kind of channeling? So you're talking about evidentiary channeling.
Yeah. Well, the other kind of channeling, there is no evidence. You know what I mean? There's
So
nothing
just
you can.
sense something.
Yeah, it's something that you sense, and it's still completely beneficial.
Yeah.
It's just the fact that when you have evidence about things,
Yeah.
like that example with Martin Luther King telling this woman he had work for her to do in 2 or 3 days, you know, that took faith for her to share that in front of the group of 40 people.
That's true. Yes, that's really true. So I'm going to ask you, we have a couple of minutes left, and then I'm going to want you to play something as we exit. But
I'm all warmed up now. So you might as well,
there you go. What's your overall message to people?
Well, if you're separating this God or this angel or this deity or this ascended master, forget about it. Just because you follow one guy or you believe in one certain person doesn't mean you're guaranteed, anything. The important thing is to know that all of the ascended masters, so the leaders of every religion on this planet, they're not really the leaders of those religions because there's other people in charge. But the guys who started
some of those, yes.
Yeah, for sure. They're all friends. They're all working together. They all have such deep love and appreciation for each other. Buddha thinks Jesus is awesome, and Jesus thinks Buddha is awesome. And Mother Mary thinks Kuan Yin is awesome, and Kuan Yin thinks Mother Mary is awesome.
So, quick question that just entered my mind.
Sure.
I read somewhere.
Go with it.
That you are writing or have written a book about Jesus and Mary Magdalene?
This is true. We're not supposed to talk about that in the show.
Oh, we're not?
No, but as long as you bring it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a
I
minute,
just
a minute
finished
and a
the
half.
Yeah, I finished the book. What can I say? I really had no idea that I would be involved in something like this, but through 3 years of absolute evidential channeling that could convince anybody, I made a whole bunch of paintings because I'm also a painter. And I made 150 paintings in the last 2 years, and about 15 of those paintings that I had no idea what I was doing. There was no intention behind it. I was just making things, the colors look nice, but I made 15 paintings that show where they lived together in the south of France, because there's a very famous cave in the south of France called the Cave of Mary Magdalene. And she lived there. Everybody in the south of France knows that Mary Magdalene lived in this cave because her bones were found with a note in a box under a church. It said, "Here lie the bones of Saint Mary Magdalene." Okay, and she had appeared to a French nobleman in the year 1279 and told this French nobleman that her bones were in this box under this cave under this church in the south of France in a little village called Saint Maximin. And so this French nobleman was so blown away by this experience he had with her that he took a crew to the south of France. He found the church in Saint Maximin, went under the church, and there was a wooden box that he found with bones in it. And there was a handwritten letter that says, "Here lie the bones of Saint Mary Magdalene." So people come from all over the world to the south of France to go visit this place. But what most people don't know is that Jesus lived there with her and she saved him. That's a whole nother story, but it's really an amazing thing.
What does that mean, she saved him?
Well, he lived. He survived the crucifixion. He lived to be 72 years old, and she lived to be in her 50s. They had 3 children before the whole thing happened because he was a rabbi. His real name was Yeshua. And in order to be a rabbi, the prerequisite is you have to have a wife and you have to have children. So he couldn't have been a rabbi. And it says, one of the few things in the Bible that's actually true is that it says that he was, he was called a rabbi. He had a wife and children. They had,
Okay, I love that. We're going to end on that provocative note.
yeah, that's like a cliffhanger, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly.
Gee, what's going to happen next?
Okay, so now you can play us out.
Okay, I'll play us out. Here we go.
And before we do that, thank you so much for being a guest on my show.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us, and please check out David's website. Thank you.